And maybe I just got a bad skid plate, you know. The Chinese girl who was running the press that day, she took her finger off the button too soon, and then my skid plate didn't get the proper bends in it. I'm pretty excited about installing my new skid plate because I've already ruined one oil pan on this car, and I want to make sure it doesn't happen again. I used to have a skid plate on my Mark 5 R32, and it's pretty much the same thing, about the same shape. I'm going to try to show a lot of details in the instructions, because I think the only other video of this skid plate being installed is a time lapse with music over it. And China strikes again, so I'm trying to make sense of the parts that we got and the instructions. And we've already contacted customer service and got an $8 refund, so we saved a little bit, and they told us, fuck you, go to the hardware store and figure it out yourself. But because it appears they gave me half of the kit for an Atlas and then half of the kit for a Jetta, because it says 6 10mm small flat washers. We only have 4. So it says 4 10mm small flat washers for an Atlas. And then it says 6 10mm lock washers. Or if you have an Atlas, it's going to be 8. So they gave us 6. See the problem here? You know, you gave me this option and then this option. You either have to give me both or both. So the biggest problem here is it says you get 5 10mm gold, silver, short rivet nuts, and 1 is a spare. And then 2 10mm gold, silver, long rivet nuts. But we didn't get any long rivet nuts, and those ones are the ones for the back. So we have 2 long bolts, but all the rivet nuts are the same length. And then going through the tools you will need, it says you need a rivet nut install tool, but that's what these are. It came with 2 rivet nut install tools, and then additional purchase required 2 10mm button head Allen bolts for Atlas with oil cover only. I think that little hexagon part's what they're calling the oil cover, but I haven't looked under the car yet. But think about this for a second. You have to take your filter off and then the drain plug every time you do an oil change. And I'm pretty sure they're both not going to line up with that hole, so I don't understand what that's all about. It's got to be something for the Atlas. We probably leave that installed. Step 1. Drive your car onto a set of ramps or jack your car up and place jack stands under your car. Also, put your emergency brake on, block the rear tires. I could just read through some of that stupid stuff fast, but if it's anything important, I'll tell you. Remove all the Torx T25 screws holding the plastic skid plate. We don't have one of those. Picture A shows the plastic skid plate on a TDI diesel. Step 2. Now you need to remove the engine bay side skirts. Both side skirts have 2 round metal star clips holding them onto stationary bolts of the upper frame rails. So you guys could always pause it on this stuff too. Flathead screwdriver, don't damage it, they're already damaged. So according to the instructions, you don't have to pull your front bumper off, you can just pull your inner fender skirts off. But we're going to pull the front bumper off and everything's just going to be easier. There'll be so much more room for activities. If you don't know how to pull your front bumper off, I'll put a link in the description. I think I made a video on that. And there's a little trick where you don't have to take this grill out at all. You can just flop that out of the way. So, I'll get the front bumper off. So because the front bumper's off, this is so much easier. Mine's held on with a zip tie. We're already missing that metal clip there. And this happened because I tried driving it like this with the front bumper off, and then this just hits your tire and gets all chewed up. So don't do that. But that's where that first connector would be. And the second one is right back here. And the way to take this off is you just tap it with a screwdriver and it'll turn sideways. You should probably wear, I'm going to get sunglasses because there's stuff falling in my eyes. I need my glasses. You can just pry them off, like it, honestly. So this is my new oil pan, and you can tell it's Chinese because all the holes don't line up. It's already got quite a few scrapes on the bottom, and any one of those could leave you stranded on the side of the road. So I've also just learned, I guess I don't have one of those fender liners on the driver's side. Oh, saving on time on that. Now that you have removed your plastic skid plate and side skirts, you should take your time to familiarize yourself with the underside of your vehicle and where you'll be installing the 6 rivet nuts. Picture C. The following picture shows the lower subframe where the 2 long rivet nuts will be installed, not yet installed in pictures. So this is where my brain just starts short-circuiting and melting down and popping fuses. Because you didn't give us 2 long rivet nuts. So I don't know how I can get past that step. Here's a picture of our rivet nut install tool fully assembled with a rivet nut on and ready to be installed. So that's what it should look like. The tool with the bolt and the rivet nut and the washers. Picture E demonstrates how much grease needs to be applied to the threads of the bolt for installing the rivet nut. Now that you are ready to install the rivet nuts, make sure to clean the holes the rivet nuts will be going into along the upper frame rails. Installing the rivet nuts is the hardest part of this job, so take it from us. Take your time and enjoy the process of working on your VW. Step 3. Starting with the driver's side hole on the lower subframe, simply insert the long rivet nut that is already on the rivet nut tool into the first hole. Take your 17mm wrench and start to tighten the bolt while, continued on the next page, while holding upwards pressure to keep the rivet nut tight against the hole. The head of the rivet nut has to stay flat against the subframe. This also has to happen when installing the front rivet nuts onto the upper frame rails. The aluminum install tool acts as a wrench and needs to be held tight in one spot so the rivet nut does not spin. Keep tightening the bolt until it gets hard to turn. 25 foot-pounds of torque at the minimum is required. Once tight, remove the bolt and the install tool and repeat the same steps on the passenger side hole of the lower subframe using the last long rivet nut. So 10x40 bolts, and we know those are the long bolts because we only have 2 10x40s. So one of those. Put a small 10mm flat washer. One of those. Then insert the bolt through the end hole on the install tool and slide one of the star washers onto the bolt. So end of the install tool, star washer onto the bolt. Next, apply a small amount of grease onto the threads of the bolt and thread the long rivet nut onto the bolt all the way down until it's Loctite in place. So I did get everything that's pictured in the ad when I bought the skid plate, so maybe they switched to not using long rivet nuts, or very confusing, but it's getting windy and cold and I really don't want to do this project anymore. So here's where we left off. What's happening when you're tightening the bolt is the piece of rivet nut inside the hole is basically mushrooming down and pinching the metal frame, causing it to stay very tight. Tight enough to the point where it won't spin when you're finished. Be careful not to strip the threads on the rivet. It takes a lot of strength to do it, but it is possible. Well, challenge accepted. Here's an uninstalled left and an installed right picture of a rivet nut. The pictures are upside down compared to how you'll be installing the rivet nuts. So just like that. And it's going to look something like that. Once you feel the rivet nut is tight enough, you can start to loosen the bolt while still holding. Once you feel the rivet nut is tight enough, you can start to loosen the bolt while still holding the aluminum install tool to make sure the rivet nut does not spin. Remove the rivet nut tool completely. If any rivet nut does spin in the hole, remove the bolt and tighten the rivet nut more with the rivet nut tool. I think at first I was trying to hold the tool like this, and you can't really push up. I'm right-handed too. And then I switched to like that, and you're kind of prying down and holding it, and that's working out really good. So we've got it started. The nutsert's holding it in now. It's got its own tension on it. So the washer, I can see the washer spinning now on this side of the tool. It's getting hard to turn. I knew I saw this somewhere in the instructions. Your eyes should not be bugging out when you tighten these bolts. 25 foot-pounds will suffice. If you strip out a rivet nut, you can order replacement ones. Could probably use more grease. So I got the first rivet nut installed. I'd like to see it sit a little flusher than that. It only gives you 2 of the star crush washers, so you have to keep reusing that, and that helps the nutcert from not spinning, but it doesn't go in the hole. So onto the passenger side. So we've got the rear rivet nuts done, and now we're going to move on to step 4. Now you'll be installing the 4 short rivet nuts in the upper front frame rails. For this area, you will assemble the rivet nut install tool with 2 rivet nuts just like in picture H. Picture H. Using 2 of the 10 by 40 millimeter bolts. So that's the long bolt. Let's see. We'll go back to 2 10 by 40. So those are the only ones we have of those. So you're going to insert the 2 rivet nuts into the 2 holes at the same time, making sure the rivet nut heads are tight against the frame. Then using your driver with the wobble head extension, tighten both bolts on the install tool to compress the rivet nuts by having both rivet nuts being installed at the same time. This eliminates the need to hold the install tool in place like on the lower subframe. The second rivet nut holds it in place. Oh, that's good thinking. Now remove the bolts and the tool and repeat the same steps on the passenger side upper front frame rail. For Beetle owners, there'll be a small bracket on the driver's side of the car that holds some metal tubes. The bracket may have to be loosened off slightly at the top for installation of the rivet nuts and bracket. There are 2 13 millimeter bolts. Vehicles with a turbo may have an easier time installing the rivet nuts on the passenger side upper front frame rail if the lower intercooler pipe is temporarily removed. Picture 1 metal bracket on the Beetle. Install tool with 2 rivet nuts being installed by your driver with the wobble head extension. So I got the install tool all set up, and you stick that right in here. I think these were $2.99 each. Buy the cheapest ones at AutoZone. They're gonna have some in the aisle that are $6.99 for that little wobble extension. No, up by the register in the bins, $2.99. So I've got our rivet nuts installed on the driver's side. Still going good. Only 2 more to go. So you can see on these rivet nuts how the threads pull down right to the collar. So all that part with the lines doesn't have thread on the inside. So what's happened is all that's compressed down, and that's how you know you have a good install, because you can see the threads right there. Now you're going to modify the top of each side skirt. You can use a 1/2-inch drill bit to drill 2 holes, or simply use a utility knife, hacksaw, jigsaw, or die grinder with cut-off disc to cut out a small section of your side skirts. You can simply drill 2 1/2-inch holes into the side skirts where the front brackets will be bolting to the rivet nuts, or number 2, you can cut out the 2 sections shown in picture K where the top of the bracket meets the side skirt. This is where you'll be drilling your holes, or where you can cut out the section in your side skirts. Do not cut away the metal star clip or mount. So here's the side skirt, there's your metal bracket. You're going to have to drill 2 holes where the bolts are going to go through. That's pretty simple, or you can just cut those sections out but leave the star clip. This guy gets out the fucking death wheel, cutting the area of the side skirts. 6. Now install the side skirts back on the car as they were before. If you drilled 2 holes into the side skirts, make sure they line up with the rivet nut holes. Now loosely bolt the driver's and passenger's blue steel front bracket to the rivet nuts in the upper front frame rails. You will be using 4 of the 10 by 30 millimeter bolts with a lock washer, a small flat washer, and anti-seize on the threads. The bolts must be loose as you will need a little play in the brackets so you can align the skid plate easier. Step 8. This step only applies if you ordered the skid plate with the hexagonal oil cover. Well, there was no options on choosing make and model car or the oil cover. Tightening the hexagonal oil hole cover. Now you will want to prepare the 4 bolts that will be holding the skid plate onto the car. Take the last 2 10 by 30 millimeter bolts and the 2 10 by 40 millimeter bolts that you just stretched the threads out on, and put a 10 millimeter lock washer and a 10 millimeter fender washer onto each bolt. This would be the best time to put a coating of anti-seize on the threads. Next, put a polyurethane washer onto each 10 by 40 bolt. Those are going to be the ones probably going in the rear. And thread both bolts 2 to 3 turns into the rear rivet nuts. Use 2 pieces of masking tape or silly putty to hold the washers against the rivet nuts. Now bring the aluminum skid plate into position under the car with the 2 open slot holes towards the back, and slide the skid plate onto the flat washers of the 2 rear bolts. Then thread the 2 10 by 30 bolts through the front holes of the skid plate into the bottom nut of each front bracket. Once all the bolts are started, you can now tighten the bolts at the top of the front brackets, and then tighten the front bolts on the skid plate, and then tighten the 2 rear bolts. And when you're reinstalling this stuff, you can sit there and tap this and turn it if you want, or you can just push it up, and that's what I did. And then we have to connect one more bolt down there where it's already tore up. You can see that took a beating before. So I've got the driver's side bracket on, and we're moving on to step 9. Step number 9. Now prepare the 4 bolts that will be holding the skid plate onto the car. Alright, so we only have 2 lock washers, we have 4 fender washers, and then our polyurethanes for the back. So they shorted us 2 lock washers, like I suspected. So you take your long bolts and your lock washer and your fender washer and then your polyurethane washer and put a little piece of tape on it to hold that washer up. So we have both sides started. Alright, we have a problem. So it's hitting. I don't think taking that plastic off would make a difference. We could try it, but so even when it's not on the plastic. And I moved that hose clamp up because I thought that was the problem. But we can't do anything about that. And we're still 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch away. Again, you could put a spacer in there, but should you really have to? I was so disappointed last night that my skid plate didn't fit. I went in the house sad and didn't even have any dinner. But I thought about it, and I'm going to attempt to mount it one more time. So now that we got the rivet nuts installed, you should be able to do all this with your front bumper on. So we're just going to drive it up on ramps and then bolt those brackets up. So I have 9 days to decide if I'm going to keep this or not. So I'm going to put it on there today and see if it's doable with a spacer. Then we might take some measurements at how high the skid plate's going to be off the ground. Because we don't want to put this on if it's just going to be so low that it's always scraping because we have to put a spacer in there. So that's a little over 3 inches, like 3.5, 3.25. I'll probably just be able to torque that all the way to the bracket. Just using one hand here, I'm not really putting any effort in. And it's just sort of bending the skid plate because it's aluminum and it's easy to bend, I guess. So right now everyone's going to say, oh, you're an idiot, see, it fits. But just because you run all the bolts tight and it's all bound up doesn't mean it fits. Once I bolted it up and saw that the bottom fitment is like that, you could do it at the bottom and you could cut it like that, bolt it through there, and then cut it right here, and you would get 2 spacers out of each rivet nut tool to drop the front of it down. Alright, so I immediately noticed a much louder noise when I started it. It's just because it's up against the pump and everything, and all your engine noise is now going right through the frame. That's crazy. It's almost like you can feel the pump vibration in the frame now. So what I might do is drop the 2 front bolts and then start the car again, just to see if taking that pressure off makes it better. Alright, so I backed it down enough that it's not hitting the power steering pump anymore, and I want to start the car and see how it sounds and feels inside. Yeah, much quieter now. And I don't want to say it's a bad skid plate. You might get yours and bolt it on your car and it fits fine. It's going to depend on the make and model of the car and your engine and stuff. I think they just make generic Mark IV skid plates. So we need longer bolts, lock washers, and then spacers. So if you do have this extra plastic trim piece on your car, that will sort of act as a anti-theft for your skid plate, because you can't get to the front 2 bolts. I'm just saying, a fella could just crawl under your car and take your skid plate pretty easily, but now everybody's going to start blaming me because their skid plate got stolen and I put the idea out there. Like when I made the video on how to start a scooter without keys, and who knows how many scooters got started without keys. It's been years since I had to make a YouTube video in the snow, and it's not really supposed to snow that much here. But today we're going to work on the skid plate some more. So that's how the hardware is supposed to be set up. But if we're going to put spacers down here at the bottom, I wanted to get longer bolts. I haven't decided if I'm going to make spacers for both sides or if we just need to lower the passenger side. Because you can get away with having one corner up and one corner down. And we want as much ground clearance as possible. Spots like this are good to have the skid plate because you never know how big of a hump the ice is going to be in between the tire tracks, and that could easily take out an oil pan when it's frozen. It's a little slushy right now, but at night, this is a perfect example of why I need a skid plate. So I was just going to back my car up to the hose because it's got salted today. Never really drive in the salt and snow, not supposed to snow here at all. And then there's a little stump right here that sticks up, and we just bottomed out on that. That's a tree stump. So I cut the rivet nut tool to make spacers to go at the bottom, like that. And if you're smart about it, you can get 6 instead of 4. So right now I have 4, you could use them like that. But if you cut these in the middle there at that pink dot, and then drill another hole in this end, you'll end up with 6 spacers. I don't think we're going to need that many, and we want the skid plate to sit flat here because it doesn't now, but look at these deer about to run out into the road. Here comes the car. Nope, back this way. Oh, they're coming right for us. Oh, there's the driveway. The dogs are chasing the deer. Get him, Scooby. The deer are so far gone, they're going to loop around this side of the trees in a second. So we got the front done, just to show you. It'll be like that instead of pinching plastic. So when you're tightening your bolts, remember not to put them tighter than you did inserting the nut certs. So like if you put the nutserts in at say 25 foot-pounds, you have to put the bolts in, you know, around 20. Well, I guess we're gaining a little. So I've got the skid plate bolted up tight. I decided to use the short bolt that came with it on this side and no spacer, just because that works. I don't care if my skid plate's a little crooked, we want maximum ground clearance. So I started the car with the 2 spacers and it seems like everything's okay. It's very close. I'm a professional hacker. See? So after I cut that side of the plastic piece, it fits on pretty good. I'm happy with that. It's broken on this side. But if it were here, it'd cover that bolt. So you can see right under the control arm there, where we're beating on it with the hammer. Our clearance kind of worked there. It's still not 100% flat back there at the nylon washer, but we're tight up against it. So at this first bend here, we're about 3 inches. So about 2 3/4. So my oil pan was about 3.5 inches off the ground, and the skid plate's about 2 3/4. So we lost about 3/4 of an inch, but I only found one other video of a Mark IV skid plate install, and if my video was more helpful than that guy's with the maroon car who's just playing music the whole time, you should give a like, because I was really detailed in showing you guys everything. You don't have to, but just saying.